Remember when Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall traded Zamunda royalty for a Queen's barbershop? One of the most beloved comedies ever made was written in 5 weeks and nearly never finished. Today, we're counting down 20 weird facts you never knew about Coming to America. Number 20. There is a kid in the My T-Sharp barbershop chair who barely registers on screen. He sits there getting a haircut, credited only as boy getting haircut, and the scene moves on without him. Easy to miss. That kid was Cuba Gooding Jr., making his feature film debut 3 years before Boys and the Hood and 8 years before Jerry Maguire won him an Academy Award. The scene that actually existed was longer. In the original version, Gooding's character tries to hustle Clarence out of paying for the haircut, and Clarence retaliates by shaving a bald patch right into the boy's head. It was a proper comedic exchange with real dialogue and a real payoff. Director John Landis and editor Malcolm Campbell cut the entire speaking portion during post-production, reducing Gooding to a silent background appearance with no lines of his own. Gooding later addressed this directly on the Arsenio Hall show. "Let's tell the truth about what went down. I had a scene in the movie. I wasn't an actor getting his haircut to practice on. I had a scene." The frustration in that statement was completely earned. He did not return for Coming to America in 2021, which makes the whole thing feel even more unresolved decades later. Rewatch that barbershop knowing the kid in the chair was years away from becoming one of the defining actors of the 90s, and that what you are seeing on screen is only a fragment of what was filmed. Number 19. There is a moment in McDowell's when an armed robber bursts through the door and shouts at Louis Anderson's character, Maurice. It is the scene that gives Prince Akeem his opening to impress Lisa. The robber is credited simply as Hold Up Man, and for most audiences, he is just a plot device. That Hold Up Man was Samuel L. Jackson. At the time of filming, Jackson was working steadily in New York theater, reportedly being mentored by Morgan Freeman and almost completely unknown to film audiences. This appearance came a full year before Do the Right Thing, and 6 years before Pulp Fiction turned him into one of the most recognizable actors on Earth. Jackson was described as a friend of Eddie Murphy's, which is how he landed the small role. Murphy later said the plan for Coming to America was to bring Jackson back to Rob McDowell's again. 3 decades later, same character. Jackson was not available for the sequel, so it never happened. Think about what that reunion scene would have been. Rewatch the McDowell's robbery, knowing the man waving that weapon would go on to become one of the highest-grossing actors in cinema history, playing a throwaway criminal to help a prince impress a girl. The film was quietly stacked with future legends in tiny moments, but it also brought back familiar faces from the past in one of the cleverest cameos of the entire decade. Number 18. When Prince Akeem hands a thick wad of cash to 2 homeless men on a Brooklyn street, most audiences in 1988 immediately recognized them. They were Mortimer and Randolph Duke from Trading Places 5 years earlier, played by Don Amici and Ralph Bellamy, last seen losing everything at the end of that film. Mortimer grabs the money and announces, "We're back." A brief burst of Elmer Bernstein's Trading Places score plays underneath. 2 seconds of pure connective tissue between 2 films. Director John Landis reportedly opposed the cameo entirely. His argument was that it was too self-referential and would break the film's tone. Eddie Murphy disagreed and insisted the scene stay. The disagreement created friction with producer George Folsey Jr. before Murphy simply overruled the objections. The cameo stayed. Both Ameche and Bellamy passed away before the sequel was made. Bellamy in 1991 and Ameche in 1993. Coming to America introduced their fictional grandson instead. The original moment was irreplaceable, and it only exists because Murphy held his ground against the director he himself had hired. What this cameo quietly accomplished was remarkable. It created a shared cinematic universe between 2 Paramount comedies decades before that became standard studio strategy. Rewatch those 2 seconds, knowing the musical cue underneath them was Murphy's insistence, not the director's idea. The casting connections in this film go even deeper than Trading Places, all the way back to one of the most important television events in American history. Number 17. When you watch Coming to America, you see John Amos as fast food owner Cleo McDowell and Madge Sinclair as the elegant Queen Aeolian of Zamunda. 2 characters in completely different worlds, each memorable in their own right. What most viewers did not register was what these 2 performers had already shared on screen 11 years earlier. Amos played the adult Kunta Kinte in Roots, the landmark 1977 miniseries that remains one of the most watched television events in American history. Sinclair played Belle Reynolds, Kunta Kinte's wife, in that same production. Coming to America reunited them in new roles. with one sly nod woven into the script. Murphy's Saul character calls Prince Akeem Kunta Kinte in the barbershop, a direct reference to Amos's most famous role, placed in a scene where Amos himself was working. There is an additional layer. Amos had actually worked at the first ever McDonald's location in Canada before becoming an actor, and appeared in a McDonald's commercial in 1971. Nearly 2 decades later, he was cast as the owner of McDowell's, a blatant McDonald's parody, playing a man desperately trying to avoid being sued by the same corporation. Amos reflected on the irony in a 2021 Time interview. "I thought that somewhere, God is proving that he has a sense of humor." Rewatch McDowell's knowing the man behind the counter had a documented real-life McDonald's history, and that the Kunta Kinte joke in the barbershop was absolutely intentional. Number 16. Every scene King Jaffe Joffer and Queen Aeolian share in Coming to America carries a kind of gravitational presence that is difficult to explain. James Earl Jones and Madge Sinclair bring genuine dignity to Zamunda's royal family, and the chemistry between them feels completely earned. 6 years later, Disney cast them together again as Mufasa and Sarabi in The Lion King. This was not a coincidence. Jones and Sinclair had co-starred together 5 times across film and television before The Lion King went into production. Their dynamic as an African royal couple in Coming to America directly informed Disney's casting decision. When the studio was looking for the parents of Simba, they knew exactly where to look. Sinclair had been diagnosed with leukemia in 1982 and continued working for 13 years beyond what her doctors predicted. She won a Primetime Emmy in 1991 for Gabriel's Fire alongside Jones. After Sinclair passed away on December 20th, 1995, the directors of The Lion King II chose not to recast the voice of Sarabi, calling it disrespectful and inappropriate to put anyone else in the role. Rewatch the Zamunda throne room scenes knowing you are watching the actors who would become the most iconic animated parents in Disney history, performing the same royal dynamic 4 years before Mufasa and Sarabi even existed on paper. These casting connections reveal how deliberately this film was assembled, but the speed at which the production itself came together was anything but deliberate. Number 15. The screenplay for Coming to America reads like it was developed over years. Every scene lands where it should. The dialogue feels lived in. The structure is confident throughout. It was written in 5 weeks. Eddie Murphy's original story concept was scribbled on 8 to 10 pages of a yellow legal pad. No formal treatment, no structured outline, just a handwritten idea. Screenwriters David Sheffield and Barry W. Blaustein, both former Saturday Night Live staff writers who had worked with Murphy since 1980, took that legal pad and turned it into a full screenplay in 5 weeks flat. They handed the finished script in over Labor Day weekend in 1987. Paramount called first thing Tuesday morning and said they were shooting in January. Blaustein later told Anscape that was the first draft of script that's on the screen, describing it as an occurrence he called extremely rare in Hollywood. The entire production moved from a handwritten idea to a finished theatrical release in approximately 6 months, against a budget of $36 million. The script later made the Writers Guild of America's list of the 101 funniest screenplays ever written. Not bad for 5 weeks of work and a legal pad. Rewatch knowing the confidence in every scene came from a first draft, and that Paramount greenlighted the entire production after one phone call on a Tuesday morning. Even with a locked script, the studio immediately began making demands that challenged everything Murphy had envisioned. Number 14. Louis Anderson's character, Maurice, the cheerful fast food manager at McDowell's, fits naturally into the ensemble. He is funny, warm, and he works well in the film. His presence feels organic. His presence was not Murphy's choice. Murphy wanted an entirely black cast as a deliberate creative decision. Paramount had a different position. Murphy told Today in 2021, the whole cast was black, and the studio was like, we have to have somebody white in it. We're not making the movie without somebody white in it. Arsenio Hall confirmed the same account on Jimmy Kimmel Live. We were forced to put in a white person. They gave us a list with 3 white guys. Murphy and Hall chose Louis Anderson because they knew him from the stand-up circuit and trusted him. Anderson had his own version. He said he secretly paid a $660 dinner tab for Murphy's entourage at a Beverly Hills restaurant and was offered the role the next day. Anderson later said he had no problem being a token white guy. Screenwriter Barry W. Blaustein confirmed that Murphy's commitment ran deeper than casting alone. Murphy personally ensured that crew members received union cards, insisting on majority black representation both in front of and behind the camera. Anderson reprised the role as Morris in Coming to America in 2021, his final film role before his death on January 21, 2022. Number 13. McDowell's is one of the great movie parodies. The Golden Arcs instead of Golden Arches. The Big Mick instead of the Big Mac. Cleo McDowell's explanation that his buns have no sesame seeds, so there is no infringement. Just different enough to be hilarious, just similar enough to be unmistakable. The McDowell's restaurant exterior was filmed at a real Wendy's at 8507 Queens Boulevard in Elmhurst, Queens. The production paid $50,000 to buy out the location for 1 month and convert it into the McDowell's set. Paramount had obtained official permission from McDonald's corporate before using the name on screen. Everything was cleared and legal. Then, a manager from a real McDonald's franchise located approximately half a mile away showed up on set with a lawyer, took photographs of everything, and threatened franchise infringement claims against the crew. He was not affiliated with corporate. He was a local franchise manager who was upset. McDonald's corporate made one specific request regarding the film itself. During the robbery scene, the stolen money had to go into a plain white bag, not any branded packaging. The building was later demolished and replaced by an apartment complex. The parody became so culturally embedded that in 2022, Paramount sued JMC Pop-Ups LLC for creating unauthorized Real McDowell's pop-up restaurants in Virginia and New Jersey. Rewatch those scenes knowing a McDonald's lawyer was outside threatening the production, while John Amos, a man with a documented Real McDonald's history, was inside filming. Number 12. The New York section of Coming to America has a texture that feels completely right. The barbershop feels like it belongs exactly where it is. Akeem's apartment feels genuinely lived in. The neighborhood feels real. None of it is where you think it is. The key New York City locations were primarily filmed in Brooklyn, not Queens. Akeem and Semi's apartment building and the My T Sharp barbershop were both located at 392 South 5th Street at Hooper Street in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. The entire Queens identity of the story, repeatedly referenced in the dialogue, was built on a Brooklyn foundation. The Zamunda Palace exterior, that sweeping establishing shot of African royalty, was a full-size set built at Big Sky Ranch in Simi Valley, California. All palace interiors were constructed on sound stages at Paramount Studios in Hollywood. The palace garden scenes with elephants and zebras were filmed at the Huntington Library and Gardens in San Marino, California. The elegant McDowell family home was a property in Hancock Park, Los Angeles. Paula Abdul choreographed the elaborate Zamunda ceremonial sequences. Landis hired her because, as he put it, he wanted to meet the girl who choreographed Janet Jackson, referencing her work on Janet Jackson's Control-era videos. The sequences took 2 full days to film under Abdul and Landis, both described by cast members as demanding perfectionists. Rewatch Zamunda knowing every shot of African royalty was filmed in California, and that Paula Abdul choreographed those palace ceremonials 2 years before releasing her own debut album. Number 11. Coming to America feels like an obvious classic now, one of the defining comedies of the 1980s, the kind of film that gets referenced and rewatched across generations. It did not feel obvious to the studio that made it. After an initial press screening in New York City drew negative reactions from critics, Paramount canceled all further press screenings before the release date. The studio was genuinely uncertain about the film's commercial viability, nervous enough to hide it from critics entirely. The gamble paid off. The film opened at number 1 with a $21.4 million opening weekend from 2,064 screens. It earned a Cinema Score A grade from audiences. It went on to gross $128 million domestically and approximately $288 million worldwide against a $36 million budget, becoming the 3rd highest grossing film of 1988 and Paramount's biggest hit that year. Critics were initially harsh anyway. The Hollywood Reporter called it the blandest of sitcom formats. Roger Ebert gave it a thumbs down. Murphy later reflected on the irony. "I remember when it came out, Siskel and Ebert gave it 2 thumbs way down. Then 10, 15 years later, I remember seeing them do a retrospective and they were both the classic Coming to America. The shelf life of movies changes over the years." Rewatch knowing the studio that made this film tried to keep critics from seeing it, and that audiences built its entire legacy without any help from the press. Alright, we're at the halfway mark, and things are about to get even wilder. Before we continue with the top 10, What's your favorite Coming to America quote or moment? Drop it in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this, smash that like button and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. Number 10. The Soul Glow commercial is one of the most perfectly constructed parody advertisements in cinema history. The gleaming hair, the slow motion flip, the jingle that burrows into your memory after a single viewing. It works exactly the way it needs to, making you dislike Daryl Jenks on sight before he has spoken a real line of dialogue. Screenwriters David Sheffield and Barry W. Blaustein created the Soul Glow concept specifically as a character-building tool. Blaustein's inspiration came from watching NBA player Michael Cage of the Los Angeles Clippers during games. Blaustein recalled noticing the liquid from Cage's prominent jerry curl dripping noticeably during play. The concept was originally called Afro Glow in an early draft before being renamed. The jingle itself was composed by Nile Rodgers. Rodgers has publicly described it as his single proudest moment. Let that actually land for a second. This is the man who produced Let's Dance for David Bowie, Like a Virgin for Madonna, and Get Lucky for Daft Punk. He considers a 30-second parody jingle for a fictional hair product the peak of his creative output. The lyrics were written by Sheffield and Blaustein. Vocals were performed by Christopher Max, son of songwriter Eugene McDaniels. The commercial was shot in a single day on the Paramount lot. Rewatch the Soul Glow commercial, knowing the jingle was composed by one of the most decorated producers in music history. Number 9. Randy Watson is everything. The sequined jacket, the jerry curl, the thrusting, and the band introduction. The rendition of a Whitney Houston song that the audience receives with the expression of people who genuinely do not know what to do. It is one of the great comedic performances in the film, and it contains a moment of pure improvised genius. Eddie Murphy confirmed on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon that the band name Sexual Chocolate was entirely improvised across multiple takes. That was an improvised moment, and the name of the band Sexual Chocolate. That night I must have said 10. Every take, I would say a different name to the band. Of all the names Murphy threw out, Sexual Chocolate survived editing and became permanent pop culture vocabulary. Murphy also claims Randy Watson originated the mic drop. Murphy said, "The very first mic drop ever, where it's like, what I said was so fly, there's nothing left to say, and I'm dropping the mic." That's Randy Watson. Screenwriter Barry W. Blaustein confirmed that Randy Watson's jerry curl was modeled on Michael Cage's hairstyle, the same NBA player who inspired the Soul Glow concept, giving both of the film's biggest running gags a shared creative origin. Randy Watson performs in a fat suit, facial prosthetics, and a jerry curl wig, all applied by makeup artist Rick Baker, making this the third Murphy character created entirely through practical effects. Number 8. The barbershop's elderly Jewish customer Saul and the fast-talking owner Clarence feel like completely separate performers. Randy Watson and the old woman in the church feel like completely separate performers. None of them are separate performers. They are all Eddie Murphy, transformed through prosthetics, designed and applied by Rick Baker, the makeup artist who holds the all-time record of 7 Academy Awards in his category. The Saul character alone required approximately 15 to 17 separate pieces of foam rubber applied to Murphy's face and body every morning. The process took roughly 3.5 hours to apply and an hour to remove at the end of each shooting day. Baker used his own father-in-law as the physical model for Saul's appearance. Every character transformation was achieved using traditional prosthetic techniques, with no optical tricks, no digital compositing, and no computer assistance. Murphy tested the disguise by walking around the Paramount studio lot in full Saul makeup. Landis introduced him to a studio executive. Murphy said, "I am Eddie Murphy," in his natural voice, and the executive did not believe him. According to Murphy in the Netflix documentary Being Eddie, released in 2025, Jesse Jackson approached him at the film's after-party and praised him for casting older black actors and giving them opportunities. Murphy had to inform Jackson that he had played those characters himself. The film received an Academy Award nomination for Best Makeup at the 61st Oscars. Number 7. The Saul character feels so fully realized and so specific that it is natural to assume Murphy developed him over weeks of preparation. The actual origin of Saul is a single sentence from the director. Landis told Collider, "I had read this article that I was really offended by about Jewish comics in blackface, Eddie Cantor, and Al Jolson. I thought it was really ignorant, so I just said, 'Eddie, I'm gonna have you play an old Jew." Murphy's response was simply, "What?" That exchange launched one of the most beloved characters in the film. Landis designed the concept as a deliberate inversion of a racist entertainment tradition that dated back to the early 20th century, a black performer playing a Jewish character, using transformation to honor rather than demean. When Rick Baker completed the first test makeup, Murphy was genuinely stunned. Baker recalled, "When we got him all made up, he couldn't believe it. It was much more real than he expected it to be." Baker also noted what the makeup did to Murphy's creative energy. Once he was in the makeup, he was just as fresh as when he was 19. He wasn't Eddie anymore. Saul became the creative template for everything that followed. The Nutty Professor, the Clumps, Norbit. An entire second phase of Murphy's career was built on a concept Landis pitched in one sentence because he read a newspaper article that bothered him. Number 6. Coming to America feels seamless on screen, confident in its voice and clear in every creative decision. There is no indication while watching it that behind the camera, its two most powerful creative forces had reached the point of physical conflict. Murphy had originally planned to direct the film himself and hired John Landis out of loyalty. Murphy told Rolling Stone, "I knew that Landis had just done 3 bad pictures in a row and that his career was hanging by a thread after the Twilight Zone trial. I figured the guy was nice to me when I did Trading Places, so I'd give him a shot." Landis was direct about his experience on set, telling Collider in 2005, "The guy on Trading Places was young and full of energy, and curious, and funny, and fresh, and great. The guy on Coming to America was the pig of the world, but I still think he's wonderful in the movie." Tensions escalated. Landis threatened to quit if Murphy continued arriving late and refused to allow Murphy to view the daily footage. In a 1990 Playboy interview, Murphy described the physical confrontation in detail. He grabbed Landis around the throat after hearing that Landis was discussing his finances with crew members. The grip tightened when Landis reached back. Landis's face turned red and Landis left the set. Despite all of this, the two collaborated again on Beverly Hills Cop 3 in 1994. Number 5. Arsenio Hall as Semi is one of the great comic supporting performances of the decade. Hall disappears into 4 completely different characters and makes every single one of them work. His most important contribution to Coming to America, though, never made it on screen. According to Hall, in interviews with Esquire, Men's Journal, and on Good Morning America, the president of Paramount Pictures personally called Arsenio Hall and asked him to mediate the conflict between Murphy and Landis. Not a mid-level producer, not a studio executive below the top. The president of the studio called the supporting actor and asked him to save the movie. Hall drove to Murphy's location in Englewood, New Jersey. He brought marijuana to help calm the situation down. Murphy told Hall what had happened. Reportedly, Landis had said something to Murphy in front of fans that publicly humiliated the star. Hall listened, talked it through, and made a case for getting back to work. It worked. Murphy returned to set and production resumed. Hall stated on GMA that the on-set clash nearly axed the film before it was completed. Without Hall's mediation, Coming to America might never have finished shooting. That fact was not publicly known for decades after the film's release. Hall won the NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Supporting Actor and the American Comedy Award for Funniest Supporting Actor for his performance. His most consequential contribution to this film, though, happened in a car in New Jersey. Number 4. Prince Akeem's central desire is not complicated. He is a man of extraordinary privilege and extraordinary loneliness who wants one thing: someone to love him for who he is, not what he represents. That desire came directly from the man playing him. Murphy described the real origin of the story in the Netflix documentary Being Eddie, released in 2025. He had just broken up with a girlfriend. He was on his tour bus. A conversation started about wanting to meet a woman who did not know he was famous and would simply like him for himself. That autobiographical frustration, belonging to a 26-year-old who was arguably the most famous entertainer on earth, became the emotional engine of the entire film. Murphy also used Coming to America as a deliberate career pivot. He wanted to move away from the Beverly Hills Cop template and make a film where blackness, as he put it, was very much out front. Screenwriters Sheffield and Blaustein designed Zamunda as a mythical nation, a grand place, deliberately avoiding any depiction of Africa through poverty or conflict. Sheffield and Blaustein stated their goal was a storybook perfect world. Murphy later placed Coming to America on his personal movie, Mount Rushmore, alongside Dreamgirls, The Nutty Professor, and Shrek. The Washington Post later wrote, Before Wakanda, there was Zamunda, connecting Murphy's 1988 vision directly to Black Panther 30 years later. Rewatch Akeem's arrival in Queens knowing Murphy was not just playing a character. Number 3. Coming to America earned approximately $288 million worldwide. Paramount Pictures claimed in a court of law that the film had made no profit at all. That is where this story begins. In 1982, Pulitzer Prize-winning humor columnist Art Buchwald wrote a treatment called King for a Day about an African leader who comes to America, is deposed, ends up stranded, falls in love, and returns home. In March 1983, Paramount optioned Buchwald's treatment as an Eddie Murphy vehicle. Executive Jeffrey Katzenberg oversaw development, John Landis was considered as director, and the studio spent $500,000 developing 3 separate scripts based on Buchwald's concept. In March 1985, Paramount abandoned the project. In the summer of 1987, Paramount began developing a new film credited to a story by Eddie Murphy, directed by John Landis, with a strikingly similar premise. Coming to America was released June 29, 1988. Buchwald received no credit and no payment. In 1988, Buchwald and his producing partner Alain Bernheim sued Paramount for breach of contract. On January 31, 1990, Judge Harvey A. Schneider ruled that Coming to America was based upon Buchwald's treatment, identifying at least 14 similarities. The judge stated this case is not about whether Art Buchwald or Eddie Murphy is more creative. It is clear to the court that each of these men is a creative genius in his own field. Murphy testified he had never read Buchwald's treatment. Number 2. When the damages phase of Buchwald versus Paramount began, what emerged from the studio's own financial records was extraordinary. Despite approximately $288 million in worldwide revenues, Paramount claimed the film had earned no net profit and was actually $18 million in the red. The court found Paramount's profit participation formula unconscionable. The studio's accounting structure double-counted costs, charged 15% overhead on Murphy's and Landis's participation, added 10% advertising overhead, excluded 80% of video cassette revenue from gross receipts, and charged interest on the negative cost balance without crediting distribution fees against it. Stack those methods together, and almost any successful film can be made to look like a loss. In March 1992, the court awarded Buchwald $150,000 and Bernheim $750,000, a total of $900,000, rejecting Paramount's deficit claim entirely. The case settled in 1995, after approximately 7 years of litigation. Paramount spent nearly $3 million in legal fees, defending a case that resulted in a $900,000 judgment. Landis observed the outcome directly. The only people that his lawsuit benefited were Eddie Murphy and me because it forced Paramount to open their books. 5 separate lawsuits were filed after the film's release, including one from an actual African prince who claimed Murphy had stolen his life story. The 2007 DVD retrospective makes no mention of the Buchwald case at all. Number 1. Coming to America has been quoted, referenced, rewatched, and debated for nearly 4 decades. The barbershop, the palace, the jingle, the mic drop, all of it lives on. What also lives on, far less visibly, is the legal case the film generated. Buchwald versus Paramount became the most documented and widely studied example of Hollywood accounting in the history of the entertainment industry. Hollywood accounting refers to the practice of structuring profit participation agreements so that even enormous commercial successes show no net profit on paper, and therefore trigger no payments owed to writers, directors, performers, or anyone else entitled to a share of the back end. The case is still taught in entertainment law courses across the United States. It remains the primary reference point in legal and academic discussions of profit participation disputes. It established a framework that every performer, writer, director, and producer who negotiates a back-end deal now has to contend with. Studio accounting practices were publicly scrutinized for the first time. The mythology of Hollywood's financial opacity was placed into the court record for anyone to examine. The lawsuit revealed that Paramount's methods were not unusual. They were standard practice across the industry. Richard Natal, writing for Variety following the ruling, described it as a watershed moment in how talent negotiates with studios over back-end compensation. Art Buchwald died on January 17, 2007, having spent 7 years of his life fighting for recognition that a court had ruled he deserved. Coming to America was never supposed to be a guaranteed classic. It was built on handwritten notes, written in 5 weeks by 2 Saturday Night Live writers from a legal pad, nearly destroyed by a physical fight between its star and its director, rescued by a friend driving to New Jersey, and shadowed for years by a landmark lawsuit that changed how Hollywood does business. Before Wakanda, there was Zamunda, a fictional kingdom built on a California ranch, brought to life by a cast whose connections stretched from Roots to The Lion King. If this video surprised you, drop your favorite fact in the comments, like, subscribe, and share this with someone who loves this movie as much as you do. And as always, the royal penis is clean, Your Highness. We'll see you next time.